Hi, this is Yvonne Galusha, and this is the second video on for loops. Last time you may recall that we demonstrated how to traverse two dimensions. Of course, an Excel worksheet is two-dimensional, right, with the row as well as column headings here. And this time we're going to focus on more the processing, because of course that's the reason for traversing. So you can see here we have random numbers. We talked about that last time. And the two ways that I'm going to talk about processing is first, summing the columns. So you're traversing and getting a sum, leaving a blank row and putting the sum here. And then secondly, summing the rows. So let's go ahead and look at the code for this. So first, we have a situation where we want to focus on moving through, and I've set this up where we don't know how much data we have. So we're doing the number of columns determination using the count method. Now we're subtracting 1 because we want to make sure we don't do any mess up counting as far as the loop. If it's starting at 0, then we need to reduce the count by 1. Then, of course, number of rows is similar, and we're subtracting 1 there, so that we are starting the for loop right here with I equals 1, but we don't want to count the header. So these are things I just want to draw attention to because that's what kind of messes people up. So here we're activating A1, so that means your references will start from that point of view. Now here, we talked about before, we have the outer loop as the columns, the inner as the rows. So in essence, we're going to traverse the inside is processed first, and we're going down each row, and we're maintaining a sum as we do that. So before we start a new column, we need to reinitialize that sum to 0. And then in here, in this line, you can see we're basically adding 2. We're taking that prior sum and adding that new offset value. I'm not going to talk about this again because I talked about this in the last video. So this isn't too much to add to what we've done. Then, of course, we want to leave a blank row and then put the sum that we tallied up into that next cell. So another point that may be a little confusing is, why am I just adding 1 instead of 2? Because offset, you would think 1, 2 if you want a blank row. Well, the reason I'm just adding 1 is you've got to keep in mind that when this for loop ended, it incremented to the number of rows, and it's 1 beyond now. And that's what made the guard condition stop, so that it exited the for loop. So we are already 1 beyond, and we want that value then inserted just 1 more cell. So that's the reason for the +1, and then here you can see we're just making it bold. Now, what about if we are going to sum the rows? So that's where you are going horizontally. How did I have to change the code? Well, let's look at it. This part is the same, but notice here I went ahead and switched and made the rows the outer, because now I want to go across the columns and then get a sum at the end and then go down to the next row and do the same thing. So that's why rows is the outside loop this time. I still have to initialize sum to 0. Notice that I moved this to 1 along with moving the I up here. Then I moved the j equals 0 to the number of total columns. So I, in essence, switched these two lines of code, switched places. This is exactly the same. We look back up here. The summing, we didn't have to change anything on that line of code. It's just the order in which this is occurring, see? But we're still summing a cell at a time, so that didn't have to change. Down here, now, since I want a blank row at the end of the column, I did the +1 here. And then, of course, I had to make sure that I moved the J and I on my loop condition check as well, because see, now J is the inner, I is the outer. So whenever you're doing this sort of thing, you just have to be very careful and pay attention to these details. Now, we already know that code works. At least it's getting a value in the right place. But let's go back and look at it more carefully. So now you can see I've added a large amount of data, more than we had before. And what I want to do next is see if it automatically works, and then I want to do a little more checking. So one thing that it's a good idea to do is to do it manually with a smaller amount of data, and then go ahead and add more data. So I want to set this up so it just goes ahead and runs completely the two sums. So I'm going to create a sub, and I'm going to just call it main, and inside that I am just going to call the sum rows and sum columns. Excuse me, I need to spell that word columns out. And I can just run this. Now you might be wondering, which worksheet is it going to run on? Well, it's going to run on the current worksheet, which is at this time sheet 2. So let's just run it so we get some results. Pretty quick. We come back here and we can see we do have some results. Now, this is what I mean by checking your work. If we come up here and just do it manually, and we say we want to find the sum across here, we should get the exact same number, right? And we do. And let's check it going down. I'm guessing that it works, but let's go ahead and be sure. And we do. So the lessons that I'm emphasizing here in this video is, first, just showing you a little more calculations using the nested for, and second, being sure that you understand the principle of use smaller amounts of data and then apply it to larger amounts. Now, granted, this isn't a very large amount, but sometimes you may be processing thousands, and you don't want to just do a macro and apply it to the thousands and assume that everything's working. You need to reason, logic check your work, so you normally do things like this. Check it on smaller amounts. I hope you found this to be helpful.